Here on Flow FM, we're speaking with Michael O'Neill from the SA Centre for Economic Studies. Great to have you on the program.
Yes, how are you?
Very good, thank you. And a topic of reversing the brain drain, it sort of draws my eyes straight away to it. It's been something we've talked about for a long time. What's this suite of reports that you've published today, and how can they reverse the brain drain in South Australia?
Just a very quick little bit of background, then I'll come to that question of the brain drain. The Centre for Economic Studies released 3 papers. The first one was on our population trends, just looking at past population growth and future population growth. That's important because we know that Australia has been a bit of an island over the last year and a half, hasn't it, with the close-off of international migration and loss of international students and so on. So we just looked at sort of population trends. The second paper really looked at what implications for a slower population growth had for the South Australian labour market in terms of employment for people, skills and young people entering the labour force and so on. And the third one paid particular attention to the aged care sector because South Australia's got an older population and increasingly, people are looking for support as they get older, and we sort of pointed out quite a number of employment opportunities in that area. So, look, they were the 3 papers, and in canvassing those, your question about the brain drain, South Australia has been losing, quite a lot of young people, particularly to interstate. The figures were around about 8,000 people during 2018, 2019. So that tends to be younger, people in the workforce, people who've just finished university or TAFE, heading off to Melbourne and Sydney, Queensland. Of course, with COVID-19, all the opportunities for that dissipated. And South Australia generally has managed COVID-19 better. So we actually attracted a very small number of people back. So that brain drain of people leaving sort of came to a halt and just turned around slightly. And that's one of the policy recommendations we think for the future. That's something that South Australia needs to concentrate on to really strengthen and continue that trend.
Well, I guess there's so much to talk about in this area when you look at the future for South Australia and indeed for the nation, because we've had this pause on immigration, a pause on, bringing in skilled workers. And what does this mean potentially, say, for the manufacturing base in South Australia and the opportunity to maybe build a few more things ourselves and not rely so much on imports? It's probably a project you're going to need skilled workers still in the short term.
Well, it's a very good question because, again, it highlights one of the really important points that we looked at in our study on population trends in South Australia. Many people in South Australia do not appreciate the fact that South Australia's population growth has been dependent on what economists and statisticians call the net overseas migration. That is the number of people coming in minus the number of people leaving. Now, net overseas migration in 2019 in South Australia was around about 16,500 people. That is, our population growth has been very dependent, not on births of people already, women living in South Australia and families. Our population growth has been dependent on people coming from overseas. And the majority of those people tend to be younger, qualified. Many of that group start businesses and so on. So they add to the economic growth and economic vitality of the South Australian economy. And as I said at the start, that overseas migration basically has dived. I think in 2020, one of our figures was around about 4,000, dropped from 16,000 to 4,000. So we're losing the skilled and young qualified international migrants, and what we are trying to do, what we need to focus on is how we can quickly skill up young people, people in the workforce, people who are looking to develop skills through our TAFE university school system to compensate for the loss of that overseas migration.
Yeah, and I noticed in one of the second research paper, when you're talking about regional South Australia, you say vocational skills training is the highest priority in regional SA to address those skills shortages and social equity in regional economies.
Oh, it is, because so many of our regional economies are dependent upon agriculture, the whole agriculture and aquaculture sector, mining. There's a tremendous amount of manufacturing and food processing by companies located in regional South Australia. And a lot of those areas in agriculture, mining, etc., food processing, require technical, TAFE skills and experience. And you notice that in regional areas, not just in South Australia, but around Australia, they're very much dependent on the workforce that have got technical skills. I mean, look at a place like Shepparton in Victoria. It's home to SBC, the processing firm. There's another 10 or 15 processing firms around that. Some of the places in South Australia, Port Lincoln with its tuna fishing, then its processing of tuna. So there's a lot of manufacturing goes on in regional areas. And this is why it's so important to open up more opportunities for young people, particularly to get skills, as we're losing access to skilled migrants.
Yeah, and that was certainly, I've been around too long, perhaps, Michael. My son's now an apprentice mechanic. He's all grown up and he's out in the workforce, and he's gone down to Adelaide to pursue that because he couldn't get a mechanic's apprenticeship locally, so he's gone to town, and naturally the desire is that he comes back one day. But that issue that you is raised in the paper about taking up dual trade apprenticeships and even shortening the length of apprenticeships all sounds quite appealing.
I think so. Look, there's a lot of activity, especially, following some of the initiatives of the Howard government and the Labor government post-Howard, and even before that, of apprenticeships or pre-apprenticeships in schools. So a lot of young people are doing some pre-apprenticeship type training in the school system. And they're moving through into TAFE, and their skills and what they've done in the school system is recognised. But I think we've got opportunities to look at the length of apprenticeships, and in some areas reduced apprenticeships down from 4 or 3 years down to sort of a 2-year type apprenticeship. And that provides opportunities for young people to double up on apprenticeship training. I mean, just like young people at university might enrol in law, but they do law economics and law engineering and so on, or economics and commerce. I see a lot of opportunities for young apprentices, and it would benefit employers if young people were qualified in one particular trade, like electrical and electronics, but also able to quickly upskill and gain another qualification in an associated trade around like the information technology area.
Yeah, my lad's working on machines, forklifts and the like, but he's also doing an auto electrical one he's going to get into as well and do that double up, so he's got broader, more useful skills.
Yes, exactly. And I guess, when we talk about opportunities here for young people, we're talking about a post-COVID-19 environment. It doesn't mean that everything that happened prior to COVID-19 needs to be thrown away or discarded. But it means that, look, let's have a look at our institution, our education, our training systems, our employment systems, our taxes and charges. Are there things that we can do now, that we need to do now to accelerate the qualifications or young people and others in the workforce gaining qualifications, gaining skills more quickly? Are there situations and support for young people moving into the health, the aged care, the disability sector with NDIS? Have we got enough training opportunities for people who want to change careers or move into that area as well? This is where we really need some innovative thinking, not just believing that, we can just go back to the old ways and, sort of bumble through. We need some new thinking. And that's one of the points, as I said, that comes from the loss of overseas migration. 12,000, 14,000 less people coming into South Australia over 2020, 2021, likely into 2022. That's 42,000 people. How are we going to skill up the South Australian youth workforce and others, and at the same time reduce our jobless rate? We have a real opportunity if we work together, I think, to reform some of our systems and become much more innovative.
Yeah, and these reports don't just come in, they're not in a vacuum in the sense that they've come out as we come out of, hopefully, a pandemic, but also with a state election coming up next March, and you've got some policy ideas that maybe political parties might want to pick up on in this direction.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm really be looking forward for both political parties or all people in the political environment to be thinking about different opportunities, new ways of doing things. Look, South Australia has been tremendously creative when we look at the creative industries, when we look at legislation that enabled small bars and small restaurants and cafes in the Adelaide CBD. Look at the explosion of young people in the small bars, niche brewing, distilleries, and so on. And Adelaide was rated as one of the third most livable, I think the third most livable city in the world.
Yeah, I think that's right.
To open ourselves up to much more of that creativity, and creativity in the basic apprenticeship areas, as we were just discussing, is enabling people to do two forms of apprenticeship in the same time that they might have done one. So, yeah, we do, as you said, we want our politicians as leaders and decision makers to be, breaking out of the mould and thinking very creatively about the future.
And I notice one of the final points just here that you've talked in the press release here about payroll tax support. I've seen the Andrews government in Victoria bragging about how in regional areas they've got the lowest payroll tax rate because they've got a differential rate in regions. Are you suggesting that there might be some movement on the payroll tax front if your recommendations are adopted?
Well, again, look, the South Australian Treasury has to manage the economy, and they do a wonderful job. They have to look at the revenue coming through, because we talk about, as we have done, more places in TAFE and more expenditure here and so on. Payroll tax is one of those sources of revenue. But if there are opportunities to look at how you support regional economies and employment in regional areas, in our Wyallas and Mount Gambier's, Port Augustus, Murray Bridge and so on, then perhaps some of those bigger manufacturing firms, or perhaps there might be opportunities for more food processors, meat processors, etc. in these regional areas if they had a more favourable arrangement in regard to employment, including payroll tax. So again, we're saying, look, this is something we ought to sort of just put on the policy agenda and have a look at it. South Australia also needs to talk to the Commonwealth in regard to people who are around that 60, 65 age group, the older age groups that are leaving the workforce and receive the age pension. A lot of those people would like to work more hours in the workforce, stay in the workforce. And here, if the Commonwealth changed some of the age pension arrangements to enable those people to stay in the workforce and still earn some income, that's the way we can supplement our labour force as well, through just some minor arrangements in what they call the deeming, the income test for age pensions. Allow age pensioners to stay in the workforce and earn a little bit more income before they started losing some of their age pension. So South Australia, again, being innovative, take these things to the Commonwealth and say, look, this is very important in South Australia's labour market, increasing our participation rate and ultimately reducing our unemployment rate.
Yeah, that second one you just mentioned about older people, I had a neighbour who's now passed away, but he was of pension age, but he would work fruit picking in the local Riverland district, and as soon as he hit his income earning threshold, he stopped because he could have quite happily kept working, but he hit that very limit you're talking about.
Well, that's right. And, look, there are often sort of subtle issues around each of these groups we talk about. Consider the situation of many women in Australia who have not been in the highest paid jobs, generally entered the workforce perhaps after their children, left school or whatever, have lesser time in the workforce. They don't have the superannuation balances that males have or two income earners have. So many women would like to continue working as if they're physically able while they're receiving the age pension. Now that's really important for a group of those in the workforce who don't, as I say, have large superannuation balances. It's a way of looking at equity across our labour force, but also all citizens. And as I said, that target group of assisting women who have smaller superannuation balances, we need to think creatively here and say if we could make some changes to the age pension arrangements that enabled some people, if they wanted to remain in the workforce and not be penalised financially, then we should make those changes. And that's an important equity consideration as much as an important consideration in terms of the skills and capabilities of people that we have in our workforce.
Well, Michael, if only we had state and federal elections coming up that you could put all these policy suggestions in. Oh, hang on, we do. So that'd be good to see. We'll see what these politicians have to say about some of these initiatives that you're coming out with. Thanks for sharing those thoughts with us today.
That's lovely. Well, we'll keep working away, and yes, we're happy to continue the debate, and thank you very much for the opportunity to have a discussion with you and your listeners today.